It is my honor and privilege to live and work on Aquan Ani. I thank our hosts, the Aquan, and I hope that I am a good guest. Gunashtish. It is my pleasure to introduce multidisciplinary artist, Dr. Joel Isaak Tlakayes of Kenai. Tonight, Joel will talk about his exhibit, Honoring the Ordinary, an installation that allows those who have never experienced a strong salmon run the opportunity to be immersed in the sensory experience of the salmon culture. Joel has a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Sculpture from the University of Fairbanks, a Master of Fine Arts in Sculpture from Alfred University in New York, and 2 weeks ago defended his PhD in Indigenous Studies with a focus in teaching Dena'ina language through Dena'ina culturally based reading practices from the University of Alaska Fairbanks. 7 years ago, the museum hosted the exhibit Decolonizing Alaska. That was the first time I met Joel. He had a video piece in that exhibit and traveled to Juneau to teach a workshop on processing and sewing fish skin. Last year, while he was in town for session, he came to the museum to study the birch bark canoe on display, and he is currently making his second birch bark canoe. This summer, the museum displayed birch bark baskets he made with Helen McLean, and in addition to using video, fish skin, birch bark, creating large installations of work that incorporate sand, sewing, light, and environmental structures, I've learned Joel's love for working with a variety of media also includes bronze casting, working with glass, and paper making. And I'm sure the list doesn't stop there. And that is why I introduce Dr. Joel Isaak Tlakayes, a multidisciplinary artist. Joel, thank you for being here.
Yaglidu, Tekili Tagashnesh, Fedor Calendar Pennington Shachita A Railatin, Sharon Isaac Shtunkta, David Isaac Shtukta, Tlakayes, Dena'ina Shi'iji, Joel Isaac Gashtana Shi'iji, Janan Ghali. I just want to acknowledge everyone in the space and ask permission to speak with you today and recognize who my family is as a respect for everyone in the room, so you know where I come from and who my people are. I am Dena'ina. My Dena'ina name is Tlakayes. My grandmother was Fedora Calendar Pennington. My mom is Sharon Isaac, and my dad is David Isaac. And I Katnu Shigu Shikaya Kailanda. I live in Kenai. And tonight I'm going to be talking about the show that's in the gallery right now, titled Honoring the Ordinary. And it's kind of a play on words for things that really are extraordinary, that without being romanticized have really been ordinary for Alaska Native people and people throughout the world for salmon culture. There used to be over 20 distinct runs of salmon cultures around the world, ranging all the way as far south as China and like California latitudes, all the way around the entire northern hemisphere of the planet. And at this point, Alaska and Russia are the only two that have wild salmon runs that are the size that we experience. And often the Russian salmon fishery is not titled sustainability because of the slave labor that goes into it. So Alaska really is the last place on Earth that has sustainable salmon fisheries. And this used to be ordinary, and now it's extraordinary that it's gotten to this stage. So that's just a very brief part about the title of the show. The image on the bottom is my hands after cutting several piles of that number of fish. So it's not my blood, it's fish blood and fish scales. That's just an ordinary day at the beach, and that's what I look like when I'm done. I'm a little bit covered in everything because I'm embraced the water and the mess and the sand, and I'm in shorts and flip-flops, and just that's what I do. This is on the top right is my Shachita, my grandmother, Fedora Calendar Pennington, and her, I think that's brother, so that's my uncle, if I got my names right, with uncles and my great uncles being named the same name, sometimes I get confused. But this is them when they were the size of kings back when she was younger. And this is very typical, and the numbers of king salmon being the size in the Anchorage area, which is where my grandmother is from, initially Point Possession and then Anchorage. So Anchorage is as a village site for my family. This is my mentor, Helen McLean, and she is somebody who I started mentoring with in 2010, which is when Melissa Shaganoff and I started working together at Art Camp that same year as working with Helen. And the image on the left is her at her fish camp in Canyon, which is one of the oldest Dena'ina historical sites. And there's a rock there that has been carved out of limestone that's filled with water and the fish go in it, and it's where the fish come to dip net. And then this is when we boated back down by her house location. And then that's us doing moose hide processing in 2012 at like 25 degrees. This is us out harvesting bark. And she still is someone who's a very big part of my life and the journey for me for learning how to do things. She's able to be very active and doing the stuff. This is processing moose head. And before we boil it down, I forgot to reverse this picture. This is the pocket dictionary that we worked on together. So the audio dictionary for this is available at Kanaitzi's website, kanaitzi.org, and then education under the Dena'ina Language Institute. And then she's also a PhD. Last year she got an honorary doctorate. I think it was last year, if my COVID years run together, but it was the same year that President Peterson also got his honorary doctorate. And then the image on the right is the celebration that we had at the community in Kenai after UAF. So I wanted to start with that positionality of this is a little bit more personal for me than when I did this talk in New York for being home in Alaska. And Katnu Shiguya Studa, that's where I stay. So this is my front yard, that's my Zoom view. Coworkers, when I'm with you all in Juneau, it's not the same. I do like seeing you here though, but I miss my Zoom view at home. And this is where Helen and I do baskets, and I can get down to the water. This is Mount Redoubt, it's an active volcano. The fish swim by, the whales swim by, the ocean's going in and out. It's a large tidal zone. This is a little bit chilly, but also just showing the wintertime landscape. This is when I do not go in the water. There's about a 3-month window of time where I don't go dipping in the ocean because the sea ice is just a little bit too dangerous. And I go by myself and often at sunset, so it's a good time to not go underwater and go away. So I don't go this time of year. But this is the time of year where I do start. So this is in March. After the state board meeting is when I usually start going back in the water. You can tell calendar times by all kinds of things. And it's part of how historically and traditionally and still today, Native people, Dena'ina people from my area didn't wear boots in the ocean. And so if this is how and why, you have to train your body. And I do have warm feet and warm legs because I start going in the ocean when it's like 36-ish degrees. And this is me barefoot at the beach. Not for a long time, but it is getting used to that cold water. So those are some of the things that are very ordinary for me, having that connection to place, having connection to language and elders. The connection to language is something that I've been working towards. That started really when I met Helen. So thinking about honoring the ordinary, the way that this next section of the slideshow is going to be structured is the installation here in Juneau that you got to see in the gallery. And there are some things that this show does that's a little bit different than when I installed it in New York back in 2016. So what I really love about the space here is that we were able to shrink the show down to create viewing space from the outside. So in Alfred, the show was larger and there was more space between the fabric, and it filled the gallery, and the gallery was about, I think, 12 to 15 feet taller than the gallery here. And it had a catwalk, and so there was a way to see multiple angles at the same time. But I moved it to the edges of the gallery so that you couldn't have a large viewing distance. Where here, it's kind of the opposite of that, where you can have an exterior experience all the way around. This show has 9.5 tons of sand. The show here has about 5.5 tons. 7, just a second. Like they were a bodybuilding with the sand. The 7 tons of sand, and here all the sand is frozen. because there's the museum collection, so not insects coming into the museum. So thank you very much to the museum team. I tease them like, I provide the fitness plan for the museum staff. These are just different angles from the installation in New York. The other thing that was different about this one is because of the height, what I call there's like a double colonnade where you have the outside of the show and then the ones that swoop up and then come down. That interior row was much higher. And so it changed the way that when you're looking at it, it kind of created an angle shape, where here they got to be lower, which is another special moment of in between the corridor is darker and more enclosed and has a different feel to it. These were the record days of why I picked 2013. This installation is basically a data log. So it's the month of July from 2013. These panels here were the record days of about 242,000 sockeye went up the river in 24 hours. And about 500,000 went up in 48 hours, past the sonar count. So that's the escapement number. Commercial was fishing. It was a weekend for dip netting on the Kenai Peninsula, which means that a lot of people from everywhere that can drive come down, so Anchorage and beyond. And then all the sport fishing, and if you've ever seen combat fishing pictures on the Kenai, it was very alive and well, and the hooking removal businesses were thriving from pulling fish hooks out of people's noses. This is what I really also appreciate about the space here and was very enjoyable working with the team was the lighting, being able to have the shadows spill out from the space onto the floor and the walls. And so looking at especially the corners allow for the monumental scale to become larger on the wall because the shadow can be several feet deep, even though this is a 2x4. The shadow, it looks like large timber. And so that play with light and shadow is one of the things that I like about being able to do installation work, is that becomes activating the space on the walls while looking in. And so that's one of the things that I appreciated about lighting this exhibit. There's a comment book, and I brought this one from New York so you can read how other people were experiencing it. And you can also, if you choose to, write a note to yourself, to me, to whoever, to other people who are experiencing the space. This is red oak. And then the fish skin is the binding with bronze welding wire or welding rod. And then the paper is handmade paper that has, many of the pages have porcupine quills that are between two sheets of flax paper. And then I was experimenting with the beading as well. So looking at bringing some of those Alaskan elements into the trees and the opportunities I had in the studios that I was at. This is the thickness of the slabs that I used in New York. The wood that I used there was beech and cherry. The wood here is from this region and is spruce. These were very heavy because they're about 3.5 inch thick of more harder wood than spruce. And the boards were longer. And I don't recommend ever breaking fingers, but 12 weeks before I did this, I fractured my thumb doing modern dance. So I was selected in a guest a choreographer's show, and it was a very physically intensive show. Always tape Marley floor down so you don't leave your fingers behind when you're diving forward. Did a dive roll, my thumb stayed behind, and I went flying forward and fractured my thumb, and I don't recommend doing that. Also, if you're ever working in an industry where you need your hands like art or music, get x-rays, don't wait. Lessons learned. I danced the whole week and then went in on the following Monday. And so fortunately didn't re-injure. The movement of the lines doesn't necessarily have a explicit meaning behind it. It's really about the feeling of fish moving through currents and that flowing in the water is what the movement goal of these panels. Each tally mark is a salmon. So this is one of those high fish days that lots of fish being counted by sonar. This is an installation shot, several of them from the show in New York. So you are perfectly welcome to take your shoes off if you want to walk through barefoot. If you want to play in the sand, it's meant to be engaged with. And then the middle is the catwalk balcony view looking down, and then the fabric height for the one on the far right. This is the opening day for the show in New York. It was up for a week. I had 48 hours to set up the show and about 2 hours a day with the gentleman who was doing the man lift to be able to do everything on the ceiling. And then the first day before the sand came in, I left for about 2 hours, and I think I might have taken a nap, or I could have been working on the wood planning. I didn't sleep a whole lot those 2 days, so the nap is highly improbable. But came back 2 hours later, and the show was lit, and we brought the sand in. So it was very much that intensity of like when you're putting up fish and the fish are here, everything else goes away and you have to do it. And that was part of this type of show, including the community here. It's a community-based effort to do like a house raising. And when you're bringing that much material in, you have to work with a group of people. So one of the things that I was trying to do with that community of people in New York who had never experienced salmon culture was to have, this is my place, and it's very personal for like, this is what I experience when I'm in the gallery. This is what I was trying to do for me. I don't expect everyone to have this association because we're all different people. But I wanted to convey those types of feelings that I had in a space where I could feel that in a location in New York. So that's my front yard. We're next to my smokehouse. And this is where we go for fishing. It's the mouth of the Kenai. I'm a South Side Kenai fisher person. I grew up back when you could still do boat fishing on the Kenai. As a kid, I was in a rubber raft before I could walk, face diving into sand and eating sand. And then my dad would swim with a wetsuit on and then catch fish and throw them in the raft with us as kids while he was like pulling the boat. So it's very much been we embrace the water kind of way of fishing. The one on the right is hooligan fishing. So there's 3 locations that I'm showing through this part to kind of show the triangularity of the locations in Kenai. So this is the spot, it's called Birch Island, and it's where the Kenai Bridge access bridge is, and it's where the hooligan and like to come, and it's easier to catch them there. But it's also the significance of this is where the first king salmon are always caught, when there were king salmon. So we're allowed to, with the tribe's educational fishery, fish for reds here also. But this is really the spot where you go for kings. When the tsikitsla, the red-crested sparrow, comes, the kings come at that same time and the hooligan are running. The kings chase the hooligan, the beluga chase the hooligan. So this is the hooligan run. Its health is part of what the decline of the king and the beluga population is related to. You can see from this location, you can see this location. From the bridge spot, you can see this location because you're a little bit higher on the bridge. So this is kind of like a delta, a river delta, and the river winds up to where the bridge is, and this is where the mouth of the river meets the inlet. This is the mouth of the river. There's me floating. Just don't fight the water, go with the current. That's my nephew Liam, and so this is the part of how my family is very much into fishing. This is the best time of year that we spend as a family. It's just part of what the environment for the beach is. This is my elder mentor Helen, and then Carrie Shaganoff this is what we did for team building one day when she was in town. She's the deed Alaska Native Language specialist, and so we're like, let's do some team building on our time off. And so we went fishing, and then Audrey is on the right, and that's my friend Jennifer Williams, who works for my tribe in the language department as the director, teaching her how to fish. So this was the first year that she went fishing. And then this is how I go fishing. I firmly believe the fish come to you, and you need to treat them well. And I experience a lot of fish that run into me and swim by me, and I can feel them because I'm in the water. I don't always wear gloves, and the fish will swim by my hands and want to be pet, and it's what it feels like when animals snuggle up to you, the fish will do that. It can be very disorienting when you're in the water and you just have stuff hit you. That's always an eerie feeling. You can see how the people who are standing and fighting the current with their longer metal poles is not the traditional way of fishing. The wooden poles that float is the way that we in this spot for thousands of years have fished. And so that's just go with the current. And I'm not walking, I'm bobbing in the water. And then when you catch a fish, you just swim in. And my dad likes to wear fins. My knees don't like it when I wear scuba fins for swimming back in. But when you have like 7 fish in a net, it's really hard to fight 7 fish because they're really designed for the water, and it's hard. So I also recommend safety-wise, do this with things that float. So that's hence the wetsuit and the life jacket. And this is Helen and I down at the bridge access location doing hooligan. The hooligan also come to that same spot where I was just fishing for the salmon. That's my nephew Tungsten, and you can catch hooligan there. It's a very similar process where you have a long net that floats in the water with wood, and then you pull it in, and that's where the hooligan come from. So this is fishing in the snow. I start in late April, right after the Science of Reading Symposium is when I hop in the water. And then I usually do really well on the last day of legislative session. So that's how do I do my calendaring for fishing? I can also know like there's some things that what I usually do for those days. This is my smokehouse, and my family doesn't keep the skin on for jarring fish. We skin it before we pack it in jars, and I put the skins in the smokehouse. And then you can see my fish above that. Then I run the smoker for smoking my fish. And the fish skin dries out, and it renders the oil out of the fish from the fat from the fish, and also the fat from the skin. So it makes it easier to get the fish smell out. And then it also makes it to where the fish skin stays softer, and they smell good because they smell like smoke. This is in that same area where the tribe's educational fishery is where the belugas come up, because they go fishing by the bridge. You can drive home from work sometimes and see the belugas in the river. And this is an exhibit that I worked on with the Anchorage Museum for the Hutuliyeshi exhibit. This is in Ted Stevens. If you're looking at Ted sitting on the bench and you look behind him, this dude's harpooning the whale. So I made his fish boots, and they have alder as the thread. So the fish skin boots are sewn with fish skin as the thread. And then the harpoon and the hands and the face I molded. And then I made him look like he was strong enough to actually kill a whale, because the museum mannequins come with like very small arms so that you can put clothes over them. So that was how I contributed to this exhibit. Other ordinary things. This is me on the way to grad school, my first year in 2014, and it's the first pair of fish skin boots that I made that I wore as regular shoes. So that's me in the Kenai airport sewing, and I sewed across the country. And then this is a pair of boots that I made for an exhibit at the Burke Museum, where the bag on the left and the tunic on the right that's by the cedar dressed are 2 pieces that I looked at in the collection, and then I made contemporary works inspired by those works of art. And so those boots were the ones by the bag, and then the corset on the right I made for a fashion show, and then that's my mom in the corset, and then I made a fishskin vest, and then those are the boots that I had worn. The soles of my boots are they're a rubber shoe sole that's from a company called Zero Shoes, and the treads are rated for about 5,000 miles. And so the fish can actually last about that long because the cordage where I lace the boots wears through the fish skin by the time the soles are done. So like the pair of boots I'm wearing right now they're about toast. I made these when we were flying over to the decolonizing opening in DC. And I also recommend bringing more than 1 pair of shoes, and make your shoes before you need to wear them. So I hadn't finished sewing them when we landed in DC, got to the hotel, and then did very really sloppy 1-inch whip stitches to get the sole to be attached to the shoe, and then wore it that way until this year. So that was like in 2015. And so I fixed it this year in Sitka at the Region 16 gathering. So that's what I was doing there. It was like, I can finally fix these boots, and they're almost worn out. This is my niece Chloe and my nephew Tungsten. This is one of those things where I love fish eggs. I didn't grow up eating fish eggs. They were young enough to where they were willing to eat them, and now they can't believe that I had the audacity to like feed them fish eggs. And I'm like, you guys liked it, because it's what the adults were eating, so the kids ate it, and they're like, they were good. It tastes like crackers. And so it's just like, these are those like ordinary things that become different when you're told they're different, or you don't see it done. So that's just some of those connections to. This is shortly after I just made the fish skin boots, and then that's me at the Gershwin the next year going to Broadway, and just where I wore them everywhere, and I wear them a lot of places. So it's just like one of those things, like, I mean, people generally wear shoes today, and these are my shoes, and I'm just wearing them. If I was standing in the Met in one of the galleries looking at paintings on the wall, and like I'm in the middle of the gallery, and the museum employee came up to me and was like looking at me very intently and like studying me, and had this very angry looking face, like, and very focused. And they started walking at me, and I'm like, I'm not touching anything. Like, I'm in the middle of the thing, paintings are on the walls, I'm 15 feet away. What are your shoes made out of? And I'm like, oh, it's the shoes. So I forget sometimes that, like, I have conversation starters on my feet. And so sometimes I wear them traveling, and sometimes I don't. If I don't want to talk to people, I don't wear my fish skin boots. But also, if I want comfortable shoes, I just deal with it and wear them anyway. But that's just, I have to remember that. So this is Helen and I last year working on fish, just kind of the perennial rhythm. The far right is my house just after, in the fall, when kind of fish smoking is done. It's the northern lights over the ocean with the mountains behind. It's hard to see the mountains in the projector image, but like this is just the part of the natural rhythms of like putting up fish. And this time of year is a really special time of year, where it's like moose hunting, silver fishing, the northern lights start to come out, it's getting cold. So all things that I think about when I'm in the gallery. I taught a workshop in New York for kids at the New York Organic Farmers Association. Look at me not using acronyms, I actually remembered it. Anyway, so it's the part where seeing how kids are often very curious and willing to engage with things, especially when it's from that young age. And then my nephew also was more into eating dry fish when he was younger than he is now. But that's him being like, you need to have some, and walking around and handing fish to people. And this was a year where I really started to put up a lot more fish because my body needed it more. And this is like when I was going to grad school, I started eating fish way more in New York than I actually did in Alaska. I needed this like sustenance from home to be able to do well there. The other part for me, thinking about working with kids, is that honoring and respecting our youth, and the like forced removal and separation and kidnapping of our native kids from our native families, and how do we honor that in our life ways and passing on those traditions. And so these are some of the other ways that I've connected to the honoring and doing installation work. The one on the left, this is at the mouth of Ship Creek in Anchorage, and it's a statue. Olga Isaak is a Dena'ina matriarch, her bronze statue is right in front of her. This is her fish. And this is in Bethel at the YKHC hospital. And it was also really fun installing this, because shortly after the two statues were set, some kids came running out and were like, wanted to go like play with the kids, and then they were like, these aren't real. So it was like, okay, the humans are convincing, when the kids just were like really excited to be like, who's out there? This is a statue from Kenai that I've done of putting up fish. That's at the Dena'ina Wellness Center, and then that's the statue of Olga Isaak putting up fish. So Sukta is like, it's a story, it's a Dena'ina word for like my story or possessive story. So how I sculpted and sketched in three-dimensional space was a lot of modeling. So this is the journey to the story of how this show came to be. And I started out where I made a scale model of the gallery, and then I started working on what were going to be like the tent options. And so to figure out like what does it feel like to be in a gigantic tent on the inside, I put my iPod Touch, because I didn't have an iPhone then because I was still using a flip phone, and did a little gallery walk with the phone inside the scaled exhibit to see what it kind of felt like. And then I did the modeling to scale. Initially, I was going to bring food and do like a large salmon eating together with drumming in the space. And then I wanted to kind of go down the water movement route. And that's where then I was looking at the design lines and rope, and like, how could I achieve the design lines of like waves crashing? And then that's when I started working towards the strips of fabric. And then this is the top view. So what you can do with modeling is see like all the different angles before you go spend like $10,000 on fabric. And then I ended up not spending $10,000 on fabric because I didn't need that much. So sometimes good things. Then I also worked at full scale and to work on different parts of it. So this was an exhibit that I did for a midterm review where this is a deer hide table that I projected me butchering it, recorded me butchering a deer and then projected it onto deer hide, and then had food that was like sugar cookies and white bone looking food, and then like blood red punch and meatballs with ketchup on them, and tried to work on like how to bring food into the gallery. And my faculty said no more food. And so then I had to figure out how to get fish without having fish in the gallery. So I cheated and fed everyone smoked fish outside the gallery. This was when the show started to get rid of the tables, and I was looking at the drum and seeing the different angles, and you can see how the show starts to take shape. And then I was working on the drum, and this piece became the Decolonizing Alaska. This projected on fish skin, and so that work went to a different piece. And this is like a 4-foot moose hide that I stretched with the kid workshop at the little kid who was wearing the fish skin boots. So now that I had stripped everything out of the gallery, I was like, what about driftwood and feathers? Because, things on the beach. And then I also wanted to figure out how to get people to feel more comfortable in the space for longer. And so I did black walnut, kind of like the boardwalk, and it's similar to the ramps, kind of that quality of like having sand fall through boardwalk. And then beach blankets that I had made. And this is a quarter scale model of the gallery. So I needed to scale it up to see what it looked like. Like I said, I had fractured my thumb and I tried hand embroidering, and that was not gonna work because having a lobster claw and trying to sew 1.2 million stitches was not gonna work. And there's me laying down, those are my toe shoes, my other footwear that I wear, looking up to see what it feels like in the gallery in different spaces. This is my x-ray of my hand, and that's where I fractured it, and then that's the blanket that I made. So I was wanting to tell these like story blankets in the gallery. And then I think this image, one of the other things, I'll tell that story in a second. So the other one I have a story with, and I took the blankets in a different direction to test the drum finally out of the show. So the assignment for a class was to take your first earliest memory and make an art piece out of it. And since I do installation art, I made this installation. Went to Joann's, bought every single kind of fleece blanket that they had, a pattern, and I started making story blankets and thinking about drum as a way of telling story and song. And so I was thinking about things that were like majorly impacting my life, like fracturing my hand. And then the image on the left is my cousin from my memory. He had broken his ankle, and that's my earliest memory of remembering him being gone, because he was staying at my house and then he committed suicide when I was like 3. And so it's a really positive memory, but it's intense for me, but I just remember loving to have my cousin around and seeing his silhouette and him on the bench seat by the windows. And so it's this loaded memory for me, and it's kind of like the Where's Waldo fabric for like, where did my cousin go? And I ultimately decided that I did not want to have all the blankets in the show because for just working through the ideas. But thinking about how do we process those things out through drum, through movement, through storytelling, both with words and without words. I was also sketching and putting together Olga Izai, that bronze statue that's in Anchorage, while doing this show. So it was all my fish worlds were colliding together in good ways. And then that's me testing the paper with the porcupine quills and beads. So then I went from on the left, where it was the hand stitches, to the one in the middle, which is the machine stitch. So each one of those tally marks represents one salmon. The sketches on the right were the initial rigging designs for what is now the rigging for the show. And then I switched from using wood as the reinforcer to using house hardware framing. These were this is another way of showing the calendar. It's the same data information, but on a single sheet. I had one of the undergrad friends that I had at grad school hired her to do the embroidery because there was no way I was going to be able to do all that sewing with one hand, or in that time frame. So you can see the number of daily king salmon escapement, the total escapement for that species to date, and then going up, you have the red salmon escapement total, the twilight, and the hours of daylight. So July 1 has 19 hours of daylight, and then I divided that to create the ratio for the width of the big panels in the gallery. So these little single sheets have all the same coded information that the gallery has, except it's doing so more with text and a pictorial image, and the gallery is doing it in more of a, every single fish is represented as an individual. This is making the exhibit in New York, and I upgraded to a brother after melting a singer and then buying multiple singers, and this, you could just push a button and it runs through. It's 930 feet of fabric. I started with 36-inch bolts and tore it down to do the gradation of the width. It all had to be treated in borax, so it's fire resistant. And then I had to dry all that 930 feet of fabric that I got wet, and then this is how I smoked it. And this is my friend's farm in Albany, New York. It's a family that came to America in the early mid-1700s. It's not their family, but they, that's where they live. And then this is my cousin and I. I highly recommend having a helping cousin and a teasing cousin. She happens to be both for me. Our moms are identical twins, and we communicate very well with like twin telepathy. So I can be like up on a ladder and being like, I need you to do this more like that. And then she can go tell the undergrads who signed up to help me what to do. It's great. Yeah. Coworkers, we got that way in certain other ways, but that's the kind of expressions when I'm like confused because I'm not using words and you're not understanding me because I'm talking to you without talking, like I do to my cousin Jennifer. And then the boards were too wide to run through a power planer, so I hand power planed them. And then installing the membrane so that the sand didn't get the concrete too wet. And then brought in the super sacks. There was about 9.5 tons of sand. My dad loves shoveling sand. I highly recommend that value in a dad. I'm not that. He used to fill dump trucks by hand for money when he was younger and then drive the dump truck and dump it when he didn't have a loader. I can fill a 5-gallon bucket and I'm done. Then cleaning up. So it was up for a week. It came down in about 2.5-ish hours. And donated the sand to the cement program at Alfred, and they do a masonry cement concrete program, and like here's 9 tons of sand ready to go, and then rolled it up, put it in a garbage bag, drove it up the Alcan, and I've been storing it at where my cousin's house and my house since I came here. The Alaska version was a little different. The wood came from this area, which is by boat, and much lighter. The fabric was already sewn, but we did have the, 12 hours of ironing that we did last week. And it had the ironing and the sewing have that similar kind of forward handwork of like when you're dealing with fish, you're always moving things in front of you. And the ironing of the fabric was that, where you're leaning over a table and you're doing this motion, which is very similar to cutting fish. It also, the steam really, like the smell of unrolling the fabric, and when steam's going through it, it makes it a much more intense. This is the museum staff's excellent sand process, thanks again. And then when we roughed out where the installation would go and getting the frame ready, that's my cousin with thumbs up. And then this was brilliant, great job for installing things. When the Alfred show, I had to beam hooks, and we did rope and kind of went back and forth pulling rope to get it up there. The duct lifts, was super, super slick for, and then up to the ceiling they went. And then this is the time-lapse video of putting the panels on after, so I came last week, and it was Monday, Tuesday of last week, got basically all the fabric hanging done last week, and then the team installed the sand in the floor throughout this week. The Alfred show, I had much less time with the man lift to do all this too. So it was very much, everything had to be, and it was just awesome working with the museum team. And then the other thing that I did for this show is I coded all the information in a data notebook. I'm a nerd. I started out in chemistry before I went to do sculpture, and then went into linguistics, and I enjoy doing legal drafting for fun. Like I was teasing earlier today, I'm more excited about legislative session starting than I am for Christmas. That's just that. Not for fishing. I'm way more excited about fishing than I am session. So July 16th, 2013 was the single day record, and it was 247,084 sockeye were counted on the sonar in a 24-hour period. And that's the panel that shows that. So then I said before, this is the ratio that I ended up using to 0.56 hours per inch is the decoding for the width of the fabric. I don't know how many yards of thread I went through. I did a bad job keeping track of that because at some point it's just like we have to get this done, and keeping track of which empty spool when you have lots of people helping just didn't happen. But it's about 2,880 tallies per the 30-foot run. So it's 8 tallies per inch. It takes about 15 minutes to sew 30 feet of fabric. And then that's that calculation. This is the total sockeye count that year in just for July. There's more sockeye that come up than we have an early and a late run, and they run into August also. So about 1.2 million fish came up as sockeye, and then just over 10,000 kings were counted. You can see the last 5 years of data and how this year, by July 31st, there were only less than 4,000 kings that went up. You can see here, this is Fish and Game's goal projection, what they like to see. And so we haven't hit that in a long time. And this is based off of what was happening in the 80s, which was less than what was happening in the 70s. The time to embroider all of this was a lot of minutes, which is about 130 hours for the sockeye, and then you can see that it was much less time embroidering the kings. It actually took more time to measure for the kings than it did for the sockeye, than it did to sew. You can see there was 2.517 miles of sewing for the sockeye count, and it was just under a quarter mile, or way less, 0.2 of a mile for the king salmon. So just the different ways of showing like how much less there actually is. And like the picture I showed of my grandmother next to the king, those are like 100+ pound fish. So it takes a lot more sockeye. Like that's like a 10-to-1 ratio of every 10 sockeye that you catch is like the equivalent of 1 king when they weigh in that category. And so it's just like, it's crazy. It's just mind blowing for lots of reasons. And this is happening all over the state with kings right now. So that's really how the show came to be. And again, I go back to like what I'm trying to feel and have other people have access to is when I'm in a smokehouse, it's the looking up when you're like, the fish are above you and they're hanging down, they're glowing with light when the sun's shining, because you want moisture and airflow in a smokehouse. So it's not, for this style of smokehouse that I have, it's like a 16-foot siege tower, and you want airflow through it. So when I'm in the gallery, it's that same thing, like looking up, having the fish hang down, being in the smokehouse, and this is what I feel and was wanting to communicate in the gallery. So Chinan Chikanik, thank you very much. I do have a website, which I kind of stopped updating shortly after I made the show. I need to add some stuff to it because I've done some things since 2016. And then that's my Instagram, which I also need to do better at updating. There's just been some other things happening in my life for work and school that detract me from doing social media. I also don't like texting very much. I'm an old person, like just call me. As many of you know, I'm like, I just decided to cold call you on like, hello teams, that's could be a message, but I'm calling you. So yeah, it's the oral cultural communication. Like, yes, that could have been a text message, but it's just better to talk. So anyway, Chikanik Chinan for coming, and I tried to leave a little bit of time for questions. Appreciate it.
Sorry, a data nerdery question. So each one of those, when you sewed, each tick is a salmon, but salmon don't come like that. Like they are not sort of evenly, choop, choop, choop. Right. So how did you deal with that, or did you deal with that?
That's a great question. So the individuality of each salmon is captured in a couple of different ways. One, I used 3 different types of thread. So one is like a solid red, and then 2 different brands, so there's slightly different shades of red, and then a more pink, light variegated red, and a more of a black variegated red to give the individuality of each fish. The way that sonar works to count fish, and that's one of the political things about king salmon, is they switched how they use the sonar to count the fish. And so it's like, how do you recalibrate all this data with the new thing? And then it creates distrust and a bunch of different stuff when you do any type of recalibration for data like that. I was not trying to like represent sonar in the sense of like how accurate is it and does it like get each shape of fish. It's more about these are individual fish that are coming up, and that's how I did that in the show, was by color, and then also the direction. And then there's also times where like the tension's off and they would bind a little bit. I didn't fight that a whole lot. I did try and keep it flat, but you can see how some of the fabric puckers, so the tick marks are shorter. So it just gives all those little things that can look like imperfections are designed to give the individuality. Yeah, I think it's a great question.
Yes, I think you said this, but I'm kind of curious again. How did you get into the sewing of fish skins?
That's a great question, too. So I started out my undergrad at UAF in chemistry, and I was doing pre-med track. And chemical engineering as my, like, let's see what I'm going to be when I grow up. And one of my friends who's from Albany, whose farm I was at for doing the smoking, they were up at Fairbanks in the ceramic studio, and I was taking a ceramics class. And she's like, you need to go to the Museum of the North and look at bowls from Fran Reed. You're gonna love it. And I didn't go that year when they were there. And then the next year, I switched into the art program, and we went to the museum, and I saw the fish skin bowl and then other historical vessels. And I'm like, I love this and need to do this. And I've been skinning fish since I was a kid, because we used to skin it and then feed fish skin to our dog, because then we would jar the fish. And so I've been skinning fish since I was like 4. And so that part, I'm like, this is great. And then I went home that summer and started tinkering with tanning fish skins. So that's how I got into doing fish skin, was by looking at historical objects in museum collections and in galleries of Fran Reed's, and then other interior Danae fish skin bags. Yep. Mittens were the first thing that I looked at, and then a sewing kit. I was like, I can make clothes out of this. So.
First of all, thank you for your presentation. How durable and how warm is your halibut jacket? It's awesome design.
That's a great question. So the halibut, what I like about halibut is the bigger the halibut, the thicker the skin. And so you can get halibut that's as thick as deer skin. Like thin deer hide, a thick halibut is the same thickness as thin deer skin. It depends on how you treat it. And so it's basically thin leather, so it is warmer than cloth, but it's not insulatory. Like there's no like R value like you would get with fur or even thicker leather. It breathes better than mammal leather does, is how I would describe it. And then the jacket, I experimented with this one more as like as an art object than a utilitarian object. It's halibut skin has oval scales that are really rough, so the armpits where the linen wears against the halibut skin almost are worn through, and it's been on like 2 catwalks and been hanging on mannequins. And I've like tried it on and let kids try it, like it's not been worn. And then the other thing that I experimented with this batch of halibut skin tanning was using citrus oil, like orange, to degrease and deodor halibut, because halibut is so slimy compared to fish skin. Doing like a little halibut, I can pull like 1/4 to 1/2 a cup of slime just off the scale of one side of a halibut. It's crazy the difference between salmon and halibut for the slime. But they're in different environments where the white part gets thick because they're on the bottom and they have the slime to protect from all the stuff that's on the bottom of the ocean. So the halibut, when it's tanned, like I've done a bag with alder alder dye, and it's really nice. And it lasts as long as like leather does. It's basically like thin leather. It's also not waterproof. So that's one of the other things in the literature. It's like, fish skin's waterproof. I'm like, no. Fat is waterproof, and if you put fat on fish skin, it repels water. Gut intestine, stomachs, bladders, things like pericardium bags around mammal hearts. Those are waterproof in the sense like you can put water in it and hold water in it indefinitely. Fish skin, depending on how it's treated, can hold water without seeping through. Animal fat works better than oils do, than vegetable oil for waterproofing for fish skin. Caribou is amazing because it gets solid at higher temperatures. So that's one of the things for waterproofing. You can use fish head grease for boots. You take fish heads and you clean the gills out and then ferment them and then take the oil off the top. That's used for waterproofing salmon skin boots. I always tease Helen, her cheetah, her grandma, would do that to her fish boots, and then they go berry picking, and it's like, Cheetah, why are you putting fish grease on your boots when we're gonna go out where the bears are eating? And I was like, you're going berry picking and bear hunting simultaneously when you do that. Which then you get the intestines from the bears and make the actual waterproof parka, and you're good to go. But yeah,
Quickie follow-up then. So back to the halibut jacket. So is that like 125-pound or more halibut to get that
those
white?
are small. So
Oh, they're small.
This is one. This is one piece of halibut. So it's you can imagine this halibut is about 15 times larger than what you see here, because it shrinks by not times, percent. Those are different. So the skin shrinks by about 10 to 15% as it dries. So this halibut was about that big and went to its tail. And then you can see the full one on the back. This is a larger one to where I was able to create the diamond pattern shape on it. So you can see like this is the whole halibut. So this was relatively small halibut. And the black or gray part is at this same size. I've done a halibut skin mask that's like this big, and that's the stuff that's thicker, like 1/16 of it. You start to get bigger than 1/16 of an inch thick with that. And then I molded mask forms into it. I just don't go halibut fishing a whole lot. We have halibut in my area, and there's a way to skin it that's super easy and faster than like cutting the meat off. And you cut around the collar and then down the sides, and then you start a tab here, here, and the top, and you just pull the whole thing off while someone else, or 3 people, depending on the size of it, holds the head down, and you just play tug of war. And then in a matter of like 3 minutes, you've skinned the whole halibut without having to use a knife, and you keep all the meat on the halibut, and then you get the skin. It's a different way of skinning. There are many ways to skin a fish, just like there are many ways to skin cats. Although I've never skinned a cat. I've skinned a lot of animals, but never cats.
Joel, thank you for this really lovely presentation, and congratulations on the installation of your exhibit. It looks amazing. I'm wondering, you touched on this a little bit in your presentation about your interaction with collections and kind of inspiring you and your work, particularly I think at the Burke, and you showed the example of your fish skin boots. And I know here at the museum you've been studying the kayak and thinking about your own canoe, birch bark canoe, and I'm wondering, and you're sharing many roles today here as a D team member and as an artist and an Indigenous knowledge expert. I'm wondering if you can maybe share a few thoughts on your hopes for artists working with collections, or what you would like to see in the future as far as museum collaborations with Indigenous artists and what that might look like.
That's a great question. I think about this one a lot I've had very positive interactions with museums around the country, and the ones that I have not, I don't work with. And so that's part of I am protective of my time. There's a trade-off sometimes where Melissa and I have talked about this in different museum collections that we've been in, where the objects can feel like they're held hostage, and like, what sacrifice do you do to go to those objects to like honor them and then learn from them and set them free by making new ones? Because the geopolitical landscape is just not possible, like to go to the Kunstmuseum right now. And I was saying the Russian word wrong, but the museum in Russia that has the most denied objects out of anywhere in the world combined is in Russia. And like, I can't travel there. It's very dangerous for me as an indigenous person to go there, beyond just the geopolitical landscape of US travel to Russia right now. So there's that side of the spectrum, and then there's the other side of the spectrum where I think it's the idea about access and then different ideas around conservation. And this is not aimed at judgment to anyone here. It's just the thinking about conservation is the continuation of the practice, not the preservation of the object in its current form indefinitely. In Dena'ina, we have a cremation society, and so your material culture would be burned with you, and so there's not a trace of your bagesh left behind. And so those are some of the decision-making things that I think about with that. The other is another maybe analogy to describe it, the difference between decolonizing and indigenizing. The museums that are governed and operated under a Western construct, that work to decolonize is not indigenous people's life's work. The indigenizing part is indigenously led. The decolonizing part is the onus on the colonial system to remove those things from it. There's a partnership with that, and it's led by indigenous people. And so it's going to look different in every situation. And so that's one of the things that I've learned and continue to learn as I go to different museums. Things the museums do well that I've appreciated is giving time and space with the cultural object. And then things that don't work well is not having areas where like the lighting is bad. It's like museums tend to not do arsenic and mercury spraying on stuff, but it is interesting going to collections that have, you can open the cabinet, put a respirator on, look at it through plastic for a period of time, then shut the cabinet because there's toxic fumes emanating, but it's like that thing is trapped in there. And so those are, again, that spectrum of still providing access and learning about safety. Playing drums. I'll end on, I could go on and on about this, but my favorite Dolores Churchill story is how she figured out how to do a type of spruce root weaving. It's a style with a certain number of strands. And in the British Museum, they have this number of strand style of weaving. No one knew how to do it in living memory, but you can look at it. So this is back with like perfume spray bottles. With the little bulbs on them, and she emptied out her perfume bottle, filled it with water, put it in her purse, and went to the museum to work, sprayed the basket, unwove it, and then rewove it together, and that's how she learned how to do that style of weaving. Should she have had to sneak into the museum and break protocols for conservation by getting the thing wet? No, it should have been an invitation. And so those are the kinds of things that, like, why would we have to break rules or break laws to learn from the things that are being held hostage for the uplifting of the British Museum? And it's like, so if you lose this artifact, an entire people group learns how to do this again, buy a basket from them and replace it. So just thoughts on how that could possibly be done, because I work with a lot of materials that need to get wet to come back to life. And so it's like, you can get fish skin tents is another example, where it's like, let's inflate those fish skin tents and see how big they are. But telling a conservator, we're going to just dunk this in water, it's like, and I'm like, it's okay, it's been wet before. Anyway, thanks. All right.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Joel. I really appreciate in your presentation, in your work, how you are describing to outsiders, to people who don't have your experience, both with harvesting the fish, processing them, using the data to show what you're learning. And it brought back a lot of memories for me. I grew up, keeping the smokehouse burning. I had flashbacks when you were talking about being with a fish and them bumping into you, and that being a really startling but kind of magical experience. And I had that when I was dip netting for sockeye, and I lived in Anchorage until I moved to the village. So that was just it opened my eyes to a whole new world. And I really enjoyed especially the picture of harvesting oligans. And I know that excitement when they start running and then the other things start coming and like the world is coming to life. In Semitic, in the Tsimshian language, we call oligans ra. But the very first run is called Hatlimuotk. That's savior fish. Because, you know, the winter is coming to an end and the stores are running low and, you know, it's a really good sign when those come in. So all throughout your presentation, I really enjoyed, you know, using art and data to show your experience. Like I just love this picture of looking up in the smokehouse. So I'm just curious, about maybe tapping into your linguistics too. Do you have similar ways of talking about these life cycles of the fish or what they mean to you?
That's a good question. So we have a prefix in Dena'ina that's specifically for putting up fish, is the Z qualifier. And it's used it can transform the word for murder and killing into putting up fish. So it's, you know, qualify the things. And it takes it away from like killing a human into putting up fish in this really good way. Other Dene languages don't have that Z qualifier and they have that same word like Atna does, and it's used differently without that qualifier. The words for fish across Dene, there's papers you could read. Calm myself down and breathe. So the word for hleka, hloka, is that Dena'ina we have two words for fish, and that's like fish and then also salmon and also red salmon. So some of the words, like the word for is like the name of the species, and they can also be a subset. So fish, like salmon, are the epitome of fish, and so it's hleka or hloka. And then you have a lot of the other Dene languages throughout the state have similar sounding words to that. Atna is very close to hleka, I believe. And then hlik'a or hlik'e. So it has the u, and then Gwich'in has the ucho. There's something in front of that. So there's a lot of you get the barred L and the u and a glottal in there is the structure of Dene languages for salmon. So across the entire language family, including into Northern California and in parts of Canada, you get a similar form of that word. And then you can also get it for eels, and then Navajo, which is cognate, uses that for snake. And so there is the connection across the language family for how we have words for fish, and then how we qualify the fish returning, and then the way that fish swim, whether it's on the surface, whether it's below, whether it's through, whether it's jumping. There's all those different verbs that describe how fish move through water. It's not just swimming, because they can do that too, but it's not the way that people swim. So it is very contextualized. Yeah, there again, papers on that. It's super fun. Yeah, man. Well, I appreciate it. We're at almost 8:10, and so I appreciate everyone for coming and having the conversation tonight, and for the great questions, and again, the museum staff, and for my family who supports and taught me this, and being able to do this with the elders in my community. It's just been awesome. Such a